morning. This is week 13 of the fashion in the 19th century, and we have two more short subjects that would normally go in week 13 and 14. But of course this semester I decided to ask you to watch them both together. So first there will be this week 13 thing and then week 14. We have already covered most aspects of the clothes culture in the long 19th century. For different sexes, for different age groups, for different purposes. And what is left is, first of all, the people who didn't follow fashion, who had the means, who had the money, but they chose not to follow the mainstream fashion and decided to wear something else instead. Actually, the reasons for such decision could be different, and I think there could be three possible reasons at stake here. The first reason is that some 19th century people, especially in the Victorian period, but even earlier, thought that mainstream fashions for women were not practical, they were too heavy, they were cumbersome, so they didn't really allow for the freedom of movement, and they wanted to reform the clothing styles of their contemporaries towards greater comfort. The other reason was health. So some aspects of 19th century fashion were considered unhealthy or even potentially hazardous by some medical doctors, and of course there were people who wanted to non-standard clothes or some specific garments or fashions to benefit their health. We'll talk about it in a minute. The third possibility would be the people who thought that contemporary fashionable clothes were just ugly. They didn't like the styles, they didn't like the whole aesthetics, they didn't think, like you may remember from the very first week, the majority who believed that whatever the current fashion was, it complemented the natural beauty of the wearer, it enhanced the physical attractiveness, so it was natural and beautiful, whatever the current fashion was. There were some people, mostly artistic types, painters, designers, also some poets and writers, actors sometimes, who disagreed with this opinion. They did not think that current fashions were attractive in the aesthetic sense. So they tried to create their own fashions, which they found more beautiful. And in this case, we can talk about men and women refusing to follow the contemporary fashions. In the first two cases, so comfort and health, it's mostly about women. Men's fashions, although of course if you think about it, they were much more restrictive and uncomfortable than, let's say, today's mainstream fashions for men. They were not really contested on a large scale on the grounds of comfort or health. And if we find in the 19th century, mostly in the late 19th century, some voices against the mainstream fashions for men, they are on the aesthetic grounds rather on the health or practicality lines. So let's look at some examples of those protest clothes from the 19th century, and the first category would be the clothes proposed to replace the traditional mainstream garments on account of their practicality, comfort, freedom of movement. The most famous, the most important of such fashions in the middle of the 19th century would be the so-called bloomer costume, bloomer fashion, named after its creator, an American called Mrs. Amelia Bloomer. She was a writer, a journalist, you might call her a feminist, she was a social activist, and she believed that women's clothes, and we are talking about the middle of the century, so even before the crinoline, so those early Victorian styles with many petticoats worn one on top of the other. She believed that these fashions are very heavy. Well, they were, especially if you wore many petticoats, and that they were too voluminous. They interfered with practicality. They were difficult to carry around, and basically she believed that those long full skirts supported on many layers of petticoats were just unpractical, so women should not be forced by convention and tradition to wear them. She was not the first woman to contest that, and as you see, her fashion promoted something resembling trousers, mostly in a way that it had two legs. It was a bifurcated garment, so with two separate covers for the two legs, something like the pantalettes that were quite popular in the Romantic fashion, but of course visible from beneath the other clothes. They were normally supposed to be worn with some sort of a tunic or a bodice and a short knee-length skirt or a kind of knee-length tunic. So the upper part of the costume was more or less traditional, with the sleeves and the collar and the shape of the bodice more or less following the current fashions. I never found any objection from Mrs. Bloomer against the corsetry, so it could be worn over a corset. The main difference was this lower part, which was extremely short for 19th century standards, and the short skirt or the tunic was supplemented by those pants. They did not look like men's trousers, of course, except for the fact that they had two legs. They were usually gathered at the ankle, so they were kind of baggy, sometimes with some sort of frilled decorations at the bottom of the legs. They were inspired by some exotic clothes for the Victorians, so especially the clothes worn by women in the Middle East, so those baggy pants worn in some Arabic cultures, in Turkey, in Morocco, so the Muslim culture, which did not see anything shocking in a woman wearing those kinds of pants. Or in America, the similar garments or some sort of trousers were also quite often worn by Native American women, by as they called them then, American Indian women, and it was an acceptable sight in the American, especially West, with some indigenous population. It was treated as a kind of ethnic costume, really. Exotic, too exotic for white women to wear, but acceptable in those ethnic women. So this is what she proposed. Here we have some images of Amelia Bloomer herself wearing, as you can see, a costume with a tunic, with a very conventional looking bodice, with a sash in place of a belt at the waist, knee length tunic or skirt. We do not really know whether it's one garment or two, and those baggy pants beneath, and two more propositions of the Bloomer costumes. One here, the lady with a parasol, a much looser tunic, definitely not corseted. This could be a maternity garment, so perhaps the woman is supposed to be pregnant. Perhaps this is something for the holidays, for the seaside. This looks a little bit like those bathing costumes, but of course the bathing costumes were not supposed to be seen while promenading. They were just for the strict purpose of getting into the water, and the leggings, the pants were there to actually protect the legs from being seen. The third one is perhaps the most unusual, with a rather conventionally shaped dress, but very, very short, knee-length dress, with a kind of flat decolletage resembling a Bertha collar, and a corseted, pointed bodice, slightly flared sleeves, so very typical, very conventional, but the skirt itself is extremely short, and the bottom part of the costume is occupied by, yet again, those baggy pants. These costumes came to the attention of the British public around 1851, so during the Great Exhibition in London, with all the fascinating, curious, peculiar thing brought from all over the world and displayed in the special exhibition palace called the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. I'm not sure Mrs. Bloomer visited. I guess I read somewhere that she did, but definitely her costume was noticed and started to be heavily ridiculed, really heavily ridiculed in the press, especially in the Punch magazine. So the satirical magazine that sometimes ridiculed contemporary fashions, and you've seen quite a lot of cartoons from Punch already, but the campaign, the kind of smear campaign, ridicule campaign against the Bloomer fashion was actually more than, I would say, than anything that ever appeared in Punch magazine. And why would it be so? The point of ridicule, the contention here, was actually morality. Mrs. Bloomer, as I said, was all about practicality, comfort. She wanted women to wear less bulky and heavy clothes. But because she proposed some sort of trousers or even very stylized pants for the women. This was against centuries of gender roles in the Western society, in the British society as well. Something that would go back to the Bible itself. There are some passages in the Bible that say that a woman should not wear the clothes of a man. And it was generally understood as a woman should not wear trousers, should not wear bifurcated garments. You may recall the drawers, those like underwear that would not have the two legs stitched together because they would resemble trousers too much, and they would go against the biblical commandment that a woman should not wear the clothes of a man. And suddenly we have women wearing clothes very much like men's in the open, to be visible by everybody in the street, and trying to promote it as a comfortable, functional fashion for women. So what we have in Punch magazine is actually the ridiculing of the supposed danger that the bloomer costume would pose to the gender roles in society, to the whole world of customs, of appropriateness, of morality even, regarding the relations between the two sexes and so on. So the first one here is entitled Women's Emancipation, and we have a group of women in the street wearing all kinds of trouser suits. The one in the center is wearing actually what looks like a version of a Knickerbocker suit or a Norfolk suit. She's smoking a cigarette, she's carrying a walking stick, she is accompanied by a bulldog, so not a kind of little cute doggy that ladies would choose as pets, but a very masculine breed of dog. And other women are also dressed in some sort of trouser suits. Some of them wear bonnets, but one wears a top hat. They stand around in the street talking, smoking, and generally being, as the the information here below this title goes, the fashion is created by a strong-minded American woman. So this is foreign, and this is not feminine. This is women taking masculine space and masculine activities rather than remaining in their prescribed role. Another image, they are all from 1851, so there was like a massive campaign of ridicule towards the bloomer fashion. Bloomerism, an American custom, and we have a scene in the street, probably in London, with two women, supposedly American visitors, wearing bloomer suits, walking in the street, very masculine pose, so very straight backs and large steps, and they are smoking in the street while walking, something a lady would never do. So they cause quite a stir, they cause quite a commotion. We have two rather shocked looking English ladies wearing conventional fashions and bonnets, and they look back to see those strange creatures. We have a shocked gentleman in the background and quite a large group of children by the look of them, are poor street urchins who make fun, who kind of ridicule these women in the street because they are foreign, because they are not ladylike, because they do not behave with modesty and grace that a woman should display. The next couple of cartoons go indoors, so it's not the bloomer fashions in the street, but how it will reform, in a negative sense, the social interactions between men and women. So the first one we have bloomerism in a ballroom, and we have a shy man sitting on a chair and a young woman looking nice and pretty but dressed in a bloomer costume, actually being so bold as to ask the man for a dance. She says, she's referred to as bloomer. May I have the pleasure of dancing the next polka with you? And he is shy, and he probably wants to accept, but everybody is puzzled, because how is it a woman asking a man to dance with her? Unheard of. What will happen then? What will happen then? So the next one of the delightful results of bloomerism. The ladies will pop the question meaning propose. So here we have a scene showing a moment of proposal between, again, a shy-looking gentleman with quite bushy moustache and sidecast, so he is very masculine, but he looks shy and demure, and a lady, a young woman dressed in a bloomer costume with the trousers on one knee, saying, she is referred to as superior creature. Yes, so she's so strong and masculine. She says, say, oh say, dearest, will you be mine? So something that a man might say when he proposes marriage. And if you look close, you'll see his answer in this kind of word bubble here. You must really ask mama. And there is the mama in the doorway, so larger, older female, also dressed in the bloomer costume, and she looks quite intimidating. So yes, women start wearing trousers, and what will happen? They will initiate flirtation, they will propose marriage. So we have the next image, a poser for a bloomer, and this is the next step. So we have possibly the same even or similar looking young lady dressed in a bloomer fashion, having to endure a conversation with the prospective father-in-law. It should be the mama, really. If they wanted to take it all the way, it should be the mama, but now it's the old gentleman who has a kind of long tirade about the responsibilities of marriage, and he says, before I can entertain your proposal and give my consent to your marrying my son, I must ask you whether you are in a position to keep him in the state to which I may say he has always been accustomed. So, will you be able to support the family? Will you be earning the money? So, of course, the idea here is women start wearing trousers, they will have to take the responsibilities of men, including working for money and supporting the family, because men's role, they continue to wear trousers, but still is supposed to be changed into fully ornamental, so something that was reserved to the women. Now we have the last one. Bloomerism is the title, and it's a married couple probably sometime after they got married, and the strong-minded female says, "Now do pray, Alfred, put down that foolish novel and do something rational. Go and play something on the piano. You never practice now that you're married." So she's the strong-minded female, Actually, the upper part, the bodice that she's wearing, looks like a suit of a man, and she's wearing glasses. So probably she's a professional, and she earns the money to support the family. And the man's role is reduced to completely ornamental. He sits around all day reading novels. And the rational thing to do, the productive thing to do for him is only to practice on the piano. So I guess they wanted to ridicule the aspirations of women, the supposed foolishness of women's emancipation, and this was a widespread opinion among the men. And of course, Punch magazine was a magazine of middle class men, professional men in London, written and illustrated for men, by men, so we have almost entirely the male perspective. But if you look, for example, at Queen Victoria's opinion on the suffragettes, she was against them. She didn't support women's rights because she believed that if women got the vote, if they got political rights and political representation, they would lose their informal influence. She was the most powerful person in the world, but she liked to play a feeble woman and a loving, dutiful, obedient wife to Prince Albert. So she would not appreciate it. But if you remember, I already mentioned those bathing costumes, so they look a little bit like bloomer costumes. And at the very end of the 19th century, with the bicycle mania, with the cycling costumes, the bloomer suit, a kind of updated and purely rational bloomer suit makes a return, and it is finally accepted as a cycling costume. So we all know what followed. Probably you are all wearing trousers now, or most of you are, and nobody really talks, well, not nobody, but let's not go into that, that the society and the civilization has been overturned. So let us now move to other examples.